Welcome to episode number 20. On today's show, learn how to take control of the movie called Life, get productivity tracking guidance, and take away some low-hanging fruit.
When you were little, what did you want to be when you grew up?
A car salesman.
Said no one ever.
Hi, I'm Patrick Hennessy.
And I'm Courtney Hennessy.
Welcome to the Be Less Typical in Car Sales podcast, a real-life account of the car business that breaks the perception of what it's like to be a car sales professional. During the show, we're going to take you into the lives and minds of those who have found success. So ignite your passion and get ready to learn effective hacks to streamline your success and boost your income.
So, is that your pitch?
Yeah.
It's pretty good.
It's the movie called, My Life. And in that movie, I'm the starring role. I'm the director. I'm the producer. I'm the screenwriter. I mean, it's my movie. And, if I don't like the movie, if I don't like the plot, I got one person to blame. I'm the director. I'm the producer. I was a screenwriter. Who are you going to blame? It's my movie. So, when you really believe that and accept that, it transforms everything. It absolutely changes everything about what you'll do next.
Before we talk about the movie called Your Life, let's rewind to the beginning of Jonathan Dawson's journey, to when he was a little boy.
Early on in our conversation with Jonathan, it became evident that he was less typical. This is something that was quite apparent at a young age.
Well, I was raised with an attitude that most, kids didn't have. I started reading Tony Robbins material when I was 12. And so from an early age, if you will, I thought differently than most. And it translated into lots of new behaviors that most people didn't have.
By age 15, he started college. At 17, he's moved out of his parents' home and he's spending a portion of his free time as a door-to-door Dish Network salesman. By 18, he was a real estate investor.
I'd say that's a less typical start.
It is. Jonathan knew he wanted to be an entrepreneur from the time he was 13 years old. As a summer job, he worked on a residential construction site. The crew was charged with replacing the footings or foundations on homes. Specifically, Jonathan's job was to pull poured cement through wooden tracks underneath raised houses. This cement would form the new foundation.
And this summer job would form the foundation with which Jonathan would find inspiration from.
I imagine this young, gangly boy army crawling underneath a house that's been jacked up. He's covered in mud and he's dodging dead animals in the tight crawl space he's working in. And he's probably thinking, why did I agree to do this? But that's when he realized he wanted to be an entrepreneur.
Where I looked out from underneath the house and I saw the owner of the company in his khaki pants and his hard hat with his clipboard, and people covered in mud and covered in cement and covered in just nastiness would run up to him. He'd point at a clipboard, point at something else, and they'd go run off, and I didn't understand what he was saying because I was underneath the house. But I had to deal with spiders and dead animals and, all this nonsense underneath this house. And I remember looking out from underneath the house and seeing him and saying to myself, that's what I want to be. And that day at lunch break, while I was eating a sandwich with him, I said, I'll keep coming back under one condition. He said, what's that? I said, you have to teach me how to become you.
And there began Jonathan's first mentor relationship.
I've had mentors ever since then. One of the things that he taught me to do was to seek out wise counsel from people who had what I wanted. And so from that point forward, I've always had people that I've gone to my whole life.
If you've listened to previous episodes of Be Less Typical, you know that Jonathan is a mentor to some of our previous guests. People like Bill Stout and Kenny Landrum. They've worked with him, they've learned from him, just as Jonathan has learned from those who have gone before him.
What's interesting, though, or maybe it's not, is that Jonathan didn't start out wanting to be part of the automotive industry.
But yeah, my story starts off as most probably car people, I assume, which is I never wanted to be in the car business, had no desire to be a car salesman.
So as it turns out, this is a typical thing we hear from most of our less typical car sales professionals.
It is. To give a bit of a background, Jonathan moved to Emporia, Kansas because his wife got a scholarship to study and a job at Emporia State University. He didn't know anybody there, no friends, no family, so the day after they moved, he went to the bank to open an account and figure out what he was going to do with his life, and to fill his bank account. And that's when he had what he calls an encounter with God.
As close as I can say to hearing the voice of God in my life, I had an encounter at the bank where I heard, go sell cars. And I say I heard that because that thought would have never originated in my own brain. I have no reason to think that. I hated the only car experience I ever had buying a car. I hated. And the salesperson tried to lie to me. And and I had no desire to be part of that industry. So that being said, this penetrating thought, go sell cars, is what got me in the business. And I started out at the Toyota, Dodge, Chrysler, Plymouth, Jeep store. There was 5 salespeople. I was number 6. The salespeople thought we were flooding the floor by hiring me. They didn't think that we needed a 6th man, but that's what I was. I was the 6th man, and it was a small store in a small town. And there was a salesman there who'd been salesman of the year for 12 years in a row. When I started selling cars there, these guys had been there, many of them 10 plus years. One guy, I think the shortest stint was like 8 years. And then there was me, the new guy.
Not surprisingly, the salespeople at the dealership take bets on how long the newbie will last.
And so they actually had a bet as to how long I would last. They had a pool going to see if I would last 3 days, 3 weeks, 3 months. And of course, I outlasted them. So they lost their money.
But barely. It's not easy for Jonathan starting out.
It was a tough deal. It was very tough. There was no traffic. There was no training. In fact, my 3rd month, which was technically because I started August 12th, my first day on the job, I sold 10 cars in 12 days. I thought I was King Kong. The next month, I set a goal of 20, because if you can sell 10 in 12 days, you should be able to sell 20 in a whole month. So I set a goal of 20. I only sold 12 cars that month. So I backed my goal down to 15, thinking, okay, I'll get a little more realistic. I sold 3 cars, and I got fired.
Yikes. And before he gets fired, he gets a paycheck with a sticky note on it.
A story, he tells us, he's a bit embarrassed by.
After my 3rd month, I got a check for 0.00 with a sticky note attached that said, you owe us money unless you're fired.
Oh boy. As if matters couldn't get worse.
That's when I heard the overhead, my name page to the owner's office. I walked in and he fired me. He said I was sucking up his air conditioning and I was wasting space.
Ouch.
Ouch is right. However, in the face of adversity, Jonathan makes a stand. He tells the owner,
and I said, listen, I sold you 10 cars in 12 days. I sold 12 cars the month after that. I know I only sold 3 last month, but I don't know what happened, but I'll never let it happen again. I've never failed at anything. I'm going to figure this out.
Then he walks behind the dealership and has what he calls a come to Jesus moment, which starts with an argument.
Where I had a conversation with God and I said, I don't know why I'm here. I hate this place. They hate me. I hate this job. I don't know why I'm here. And again, as clear as I can say I've ever been directed by God, he said, it's all your fault. And I argued with him because I thought obviously he wasn't paying attention.
But he loses the argument.
But he won the argument and convinced me that it was all my fault. And that was the beginning for me when I took full and complete responsibility.
And this is where his real car sales journey begins.
And I said, from this day forward, I'll become the number 1 salesperson at this dealership, number 1 salesperson in this town, and I will change the way people buy cars. And that was the solemn oath promise I made to God that day. And I said, I'm going to figure this thing out. And that was when I created my path or my journey for discovering the psychology of selling.
He made this commitment, and it wasn't long before he accomplished his goal. He became the number 1 salesman, sold more vehicles for list price than anyone else at the dealership, and eventually the owner asked him to take on a training role.
Apparently I did enough things, not only did it right, but I did it in a way that I had earned the respect of my peers and the respect of my supervisors. They were willing to learn from me.
To train the same guys that had made bets on how long he'd last in the business. This reminds me of a blog post I recently wrote on adversity. How we react and leverage adversity is a key indicator of someone who's a high potential, or high pot as we like to call them. Not only did Jonathan accomplish his goal, but he did it with integrity and in a way that was respectful.
Just because you sell the most cars doesn't mean you're respected. Those two things don't always go hand in hand. In fact, I've worked with a few guys that sell 30 or more cars a month, but they definitely don't have the respect of their managers or many of their team members.
So that's how Jonathan got into the car business. Today, he's the owner of Sellcology, automotive sales training, speaking, and consulting.
Sellcology, again, it's a hybrid of selling and psychology. So selling through psychology is what Sellcology is all about.
He believes in selling through principles and psychology versus through process or mimicking personality traits.
Fundamentally, what I believe is that there are certain principles. And if you follow those principles, you can have success. Success leaves clues in the form of principles. And so my focus has been on the psychology and the principles of sales, trying to teach salespeople, managers, dealers that I work with how to think from the principle-based approach rather than a personality or process alone. Not that you don't need both. You still have to have a personality, you have to have a process. But I think principles ultimately is what makes it successful.
We agree.
Psychology principles are based on humans, so regardless of what industry you serve, if you apply the same selling principles embedded in psychology, they will work.
And once you understand those principles and apply them, it works. Because, psychology works on humans. So as long as your audience is a human, you should be all right.
Just to be clear, Jonathan doesn't have a degree in psychology. He's learned these principles through practice.
My foundation in psychology was really earned through what they call the School of Hard Knocks.
This is my kind of guy. Although I'm a firm believer in a college degree, your experience and who you know really teach you more than any professor could.
I was always fascinated by what makes people decide to trust you and like you. And so I just started my own personal study, read a lot of books, and pounded a lot of pavement, knocked on a lot of doors.
Jonathan pulls from his experience in Hard Knocks education to lay out the top 3 things he recommends if you want to set yourself up for success.
You got to be willing to plant some seeds. You got to be willing to let a season come and go so you can reap a harvest. So some of my advice would be more directed towards here's how you think a little bit longer term to really set up your success. And that would be things like tracking and organizing their day effectively. So teaching them how to set a proper daily schedule and how to track their daily activities and results.
Something we've heard time and time again from top performers. We've talked about schedules in several episodes. A few of our favorites include Bill Stout, Part 1, Episode 18, and Victor Montoya, Episode 15.
Since we talked scheduling before, let's focus on tracking. Jonathan says the first thing you need to track is...
I would say you have to start tracking immediately. You have to track how many total conversations you have with non-employees. So physically at the premises, I want to know how many times a day do you talk to somebody who doesn't work for the company?
Okay, that seems like a pretty easy item to track.
It does. What's next?
Then you follow that tracking up by asking the next question. Of all the people that you talked to, how many of them were technically eligible to be sold or prospected from?
Let's break that down. Who would be considered an eligible prospect?
What that means is I may have a conversation with the UPS guy who stops to drop off or pick up packages. Well, I'm going to track that as a conversation that I had with a UPS guy. Now, that UPS guy, if he's bought from the dealership before and currently works with Bob, well, then I talked to the guy, but I can't count him as an opportunity for myself because he belongs to Bob.
Okay, that makes sense.
But suppose I ask that same UPS guy, hey, if you were ever going to be in the market for a car or send a friend or family member into the dealership, is there anybody here you would work with? And he says, no, I really don't have anybody here. Well, then that one UPS guy becomes, for me, an opportunity.
So once you have the numbers tracked, the people you talk to, and your eligible prospect opportunities, what do you do with those numbers?
So I tracked the ratios of my conversations to opportunities. How many total conversations, how many of those resulted in possible opportunities?
These ratios provide you with a track record, substantiation for how you're spending time throughout the day, and they help you stay focused on the task at hand, selling cars.
What else should salespeople be tracking?
Time out. One quick note. To get a free job aid with all of the action items Jonathan recommends throughout this episode, go to belesstypical.com/Dawson or text the word Dawson, DAWSON, to the number 44222 and opt in. We'll send you a printable version you can start using today. Just go to belesstypical.com/Dawson or text the word Dawson to the number 44222 and opt in. It's easy. Now back to the show.
Okay, he goes through these quick, so get ready.
And then, of course, you go through the road of the sale. So you track the total number of times you show a car, the total number of times you drive a car, total number of times you present an offer to do business, total number of times the customer says yes, total number of times that you deliver that sale. So in each of those categories, I want to know the ratios between each stage.
This exercise not only gives you discipline, but it also provides a pretty clear picture of your productivity. I love it. Okay, so tracking is the first thing Jonathan recommends doing if you're new or ready to step up your game. What's the second?
Is to get very, very comfortable with technologies and social media tools and applications and learn how to use those as a means of communicating with your audience.
We couldn't agree more. And a piece of advice we preach about all the time.
So I would say, if you're on social, clean up your act. Make sure that your site is clearly communicating your professional brand and image that you want to represent to the marketplace.
You need to own your profession and be a professional salesperson. Social is a free tool to ensure everyone in your network knows what you do. If they don't, it's costing you sales. If you don't believe me, go back to episode number 1 where we talked to Amy Gers. In the episode, I interviewed a friend of mine who had just bought a car without realizing that a longtime friend worked at the dealership she bought from. And she didn't buy her car from him. Why? Because she didn't know he worked there, even though she's friends with him on social. That's a shame.
Agreed. Moving on, what's Jonathan's number 3 recommendation?
And then the third thing I would ask him to do is become a student of the business.
What exactly does he mean, student of the business?
I like to tell my students, imagine you were shipped off to war. I want 90 days. I want 90 days of disciplined study, which means, forfeit television, forfeit, going to the movies, forfeit stuff. Say to all your friends, I'm going to war for 90 days. I'm shipping out. And commit yourself to just becoming a student of the industry. And there's so many great resources out there that are free.
Not an uncommon message. We heard this from Troy Turbo Spring in episode 9 as well.
Blogs, articles, books, downloadables, audio files, interviews like this. There's so much great resource out there that I would say commit yourself to 90 days of just diving head first in to becoming a professional salesperson in this industry.
And if you do these 3 things, track your productivity, use technology to communicate, and become a student of the business,
there's more things you could do, but if you followed those 3 things, you'd be setting your family up for a sound financial security and sound financial future.
What about if you're 2 years or maybe more into the business? Does all of this still apply? Do you still need to track, leverage technology, and continue to be a student of the business?
We say yes, and so does Jonathan.
Tell me your ratio of total write-ups to total conversations. I don't know. Tell me your ratio of total demo drives. Okay, tell me the total number of conversations you've had last month. I don't know. So, yeah, I would say if you're 2 years in the business and you don't know your numbers, that's a problem.
And the reason most salespeople don't commit and don't track?
But if you don't have numbers, all you have is impressions in your mind, and you become delusional very quickly. I mean, the average salesperson is self-deluded. They have no real clue on what they're doing right or wrong. They don't record themselves. They don't track themselves. But again, the average salesperson doesn't really want to know the truth. That's why they're stuck on average.
No one wants to be average. So to sum it up,
So yeah, I would say some of those principles, whether you're 2 years in or 20 years in, if you can't tell me your numbers, that's a problem. If you're no longer a student of the business, that's a problem. And I don't care if you've been selling cars for 5 years. If I pull up your social media or your YouTube and I see what you've got out there, it's probably a mess. It's probably not cohesive. It's probably not a directed brand. It's probably not a unified marketing message. And I would say you got to clean up your act. So I think it applies.
All great, tactical, actionable advice to get you moving in the right direction.
So what's the biggest obstacle salespeople face?
I would say probably the major obstacle salespeople have is really in their own psychology. And it has to do with kind of the aha moment, the come to Jesus moment that I personally experienced, where I accepted everything completely and 100% is my fault. And the average salesperson, again, doesn't want to believe that that's true. So to give you a practical on that, I would have a very difficult customer who shows up on the lot with a chip on their shoulder. I do everything in my power to stop that person from keeping that chip on their shoulder. They leave with the chip on their shoulder. I still said that was my fault.
This is interesting and less typical than most salespeople's mentality that I know. Let's hear more.
Customer buys down the road and has a better deal down the road and says, sorry, John, they beat you by $1,000. My fault.
Okay.
Customer says they went with a different product. My fault. Customer says that they're going to wait until the incentives change. My fault.
I'm starting to see a pattern here.
I adopted a philosophy that said everything absolutely that comes into my world is my fault. It's 100% mine. And that is something that very few salespeople want to really accept and believe. And I would say that that's probably one of the biggest obstacles they have is their own psychology. If you don't accept my standard that I'm sharing with you, if you don't believe that philosophy, you enter into victimology fairly fast. It's very easy to blame management. They're not putting enough in the trades. They're not getting the right vehicles. They're not advertising like they should. They're not coming out and taking good TOs. They suck as closers. They're hiring too many people. I mean, the list goes on. I mean, there's 1,000 things if you look for them that are the reasons why you're not successful.
This is a concept I first learned from our very own host, Patrick. He taught me this back in the day when we were just coworkers and not yet married. Let's hear about it from his perspective.
Hearing what you're saying, this is how it computes in my mind and how I've always ran it through my database, I guess, is that I have a role in everything that happens to me. And it didn't occur to me until I was probably 28 years old, almost 30 probably, that whole personal perception of life changed. It wasn't just car sales, right? It was everything. Sure. And I think that you see that, especially, I don't know if it's just amplified in a dealership for whatever reason, it perpetuates itself, but there are so many people that just want to point fingers. It was never their fault. It's the egos, it's whatever. But man, oh man, you find the guy or the couple people that really are willing to take it on and own it, and take responsibility that they have a role in everything. They're the ones that you see excel and amplify, much faster than the regular curve.
Kind of like that movie, the movie called Your Life. You are responsible for your own results. If you don't realize and recognize your role in the way things play out,
and you just can't do it. You can't buy into that lie, or you stay stuck.
The outcome of taking ownership is quite the opposite, as Jonathan describes in his own experience.
And that was liberating for me. It set me free, and it allowed me to become incredibly creative. It allowed me to become more confident in my ability to change outcomes. I had to. It was my fault.
And it's hard to get to a breakthrough in this line of thinking. Sometimes it takes a traumatic event, some type of personal drama or situation to come to the realization. Sometimes you come to the realization through a coach. I know that I didn't take ownership for a lot of things in my life, be it personal or professional, until I was coached to think different. This coach just so happens to now be my husband. But in all seriousness, it was a game changer for me. Until this change happens, people stay stuck.
Until that happens, most will stay stuck. And, average sucks. It just sucks. It's very painful to be average.
And like I said earlier, no one wants to be average. As a quick plug for Jonathan and the coaching he offers individual salespeople, if you're stuck, reach out to him. We'll link to his websites, blog, and social media in the show notes at belesstypical.com/020.
So we've talked about Jonathan's top 3 action items. We've talked about the biggest obstacle salespeople face. Let's go for some low-hanging fruit, something you can change and try out today on the job. Jonathan calls these subtle language changes.
Subtle language changes can influence and impact customers' motivation to buy.
We can all appreciate how emphasizing certain aspects with a customer changes the dynamic. There's a great story I love to share in my training. I say there's a preacher man who has 2 sons. And one son comes to him and he says, "Daddy, can I eat while I pray?" And the dad says, "Eat while you pray? No, of course not. What are you talking about? You don't eat while you pray. Are you kidding me? Get out of here. Where do you come up with this stuff?" His next son comes up to him later in the day and says, "Daddy, is it okay if I pray while I eat?" And he says, "Well, son, the scriptures, they say to pray always in all things. You should always find time to pray. You're a good kid." So what's the difference? They're both essentially asking the same thing, but by emphasizing a certain aspect of the question, it changes the dynamic and the feel entirely.
So true. So let's look at another example, one that's specific to our industry.
To set it up, here's a classic scenario that I think everyone can relate to. A customer asks a question that you, the salesperson, doesn't want to answer yet. For example, let's say you've just greeted a customer on the lot and they start firing questions at you. Questions like, what's my trade-in value? What are the going rates when financing? And you haven't even landed on a vehicle yet. So these questions are considered to be premature in nature.
So this is a classic scenario, and the average salesperson's response is something to the effect of, "Hey, I understand the question. I totally get it. I'm not the one who handles that. My job's to make sure you find the right car. Let's do this. I'll get you the price that you're wanting, but first, let's make sure we like the car and drive the car." So again, classic response, no big deal.
I'd say that's pretty classic. How can you change the response and fix it?
Problem with that is there's 2 words that I hate, which are the word but and the word first. To me, those words are terrible words to use in a sales approach. The word but obviously operates as some sort of contraction. It essentially negates what you've just said. You say, "I'm going to help you, but." Well, as soon as you say but, you've somehow negated what you just told them. So I get rid of that. I think that's terrible. The next thing that we often hear is we hear things like, "Well, we'll do this, but first let's do this." So then there becomes this assertion of priority of what's going to happen. So first, let's drive the car. First, let's pick out a car. First, let's do this. So I hate that assertion as well because it ranks or prioritizes the salesperson's desires above the client's. It's saying, I understand what you want, but what I want is more important. So again, it's a simple example of that. You replace but first with and both. So it sounds something like this. I appreciate the question on the price. I'll be happy to work with you on that. I will get you the price on the car, and I'll make sure that it's a car that you're going to really like. I'm going to make sure I get you both. So instead of saying, but let's make sure it's a car you like, I say, and I'll make sure it's a car you like. Instead of saying, first we'll do this, then we'll do this, I say, we're going to do both for you.
It's a more cooperative language to use. Substitute and both in the place of but first. Subtle, but it does change the delivery and the feelings associated with it.
Another example of altering language.
A manager. My manager is the one who sets the price. My manager is the one who I'd have to ask for approval on that. My manager will have to look at your trade again, which elevates a single person in a role that, may create conflict.
So replace the title manager and instead say something like member of the management team or a management team member. Another example to use is the word computer.
I also use the word computer instead of manager, depending on what I'm talking about. So instead of me saying, my manager gave me a worksheet here for you, so here's what the numbers are. I'll say the computer has generated an option, for you, and here's what the numbers are. So deflecting to the computer rather than to a manager.
Other subtle language changes: value price versus sale price, fair market value instead of trade-in price, and experience versus test drive.
A whole bunch of subtle changes that I make in my language choices with the customer that it just changes the tonality of what we're saying. It changes how it feels.
And people buy from people they like, people they trust. Jonathan runs us through another scenario, a real-life example. During a dealership visit, he intercepted a conversation with a salesman who had a customer that didn't want to test drive a vehicle. He only wanted the price and some numbers.
And I said, well, let me go talk to your customer. So I walked out there, started, a conversation with the client who was on the show floor. And I said, have you had an opportunity to experience the Kia Soul? And he said, experience it, it's a Kia. And I said, yes, sir, but it's quite the experience. Have you had an opportunity to experience it for yourself? He says, no, man, I really haven't. I was just here to see if I can get some numbers. I said, well, I think you're robbing yourself of quite an experience, and I really encourage you to experience it. And I just used the word experience like 7 times in a row with the guy. And he says, wow, you're serious about this, aren't you? And I said, I absolutely am, and I'd love to hear your opinion once you experience it for yourself. I'll get the keys. He said, okay. He comes back from the test drive, and I said to the customer, I said, what was your opinion now that you've experienced it? He said, that's a lot more car than I thought it was going to be. That's actually a really nice car.
So the question then becomes, who would you rather present numbers to? The guy who just came in asking for numbers, or the guy who experiences the vehicle and thinks it's a really nice car? I think we all know the answer to that one.
And if you're willing to put the kind of effort and focus we've talked about throughout this episode into your personal, professional career, you will undoubtedly find success. Finding success can give you the freedom you're looking for, which is why Jonathan has devoted his professional career to the automotive industry.
When I was younger, I didn't have a relationship with my father because he worked so much. He worked 3 jobs to provide for us. And as a kid, you don't understand that. You don't appreciate what your dad is doing. You just see that he's never there. All you know is that he doesn't care because he doesn't come to the games, and he's not there to play, and he comes home stressed and tired, and he has a short temper. And that's what I grew up with. And I said, if I can change that, not only for my life, but for anybody else, if I can give them back what I never had with my dad, that's why I'm going to do this. I'm going to save the world one salesperson at a time.
Saving the world one salesperson at a time. A mission that we try to do here at Be Less Typical too.
In closing, Jonathan shares a few additional thoughts.
You can have absolute certainty. I'm talking complete confidence that you can create the kind of income your family deserves. And that if you're going to step away from your family or whoever it is that you love most in the world and come to a dealership for 50 or 60 hours a week, that they deserve out of that time, and you deserve out of that time, the best possible version of yourself to optimize your opportunities to create the kind of financial future and security that your family deserves. I also would say to you that you can also have the greatest sense of variety and creativity when you learn how to sell properly. Every day is a new day. Every sale an adventure. You can have that as well. And if you're somebody who wants to be in a community of top performers, they say that it's lonely at the top. You know what? I would say there's plenty of room. Come join us. It's a party. There's a lot of great car people out there who do it the right way, and the world is waiting for another great car person who will come out and do it the right way. Once you decide to do that, you'll be super unique. So I would just say to anybody listening to this, if you find anything out of this conversation, I hope you've been encouraged. I hope that you have increased in your hope of what's possible for your family, what's possible for your business, and what's possible out of your own production. My hope is that I've given you hope.
Amen. To connect with Jonathan, just Google Sellchology, SELLCHOLOGY, or check out his blog at whycarguy.com. AutomotiveTNT.com is his personal coaching platform, which provides support and resources for individual salespeople. Or if you're interested in dealership support, check out Sellchologyuniversity.com. You can find him on Facebook, and of course, we'll link to all of this in the show notes. And don't forget, if you want the Job Aid PDF we mentioned earlier in the show to start implementing Jonathan's advice today, text the word Dawson, DAWSON, to the number 44222 and opt in.
Again, a special thank you to Jonathan Dawson for being a guest on the show. For show notes, go to belesstypical.com/020. Be sure to subscribe to the show so you don't miss an episode. To find all previous episodes of the show, find us on iTunes, Stitcher, or our website.
Our theme song is by the mysterious Breakmaster Cylinder. All episode editing and mixing is done by us, a couple of amateurs learning as we go.
2 items before we sign off. Number 1, please take a moment to share our show with your friends, family, and coworkers. Sharing is caring, and we appreciate your support. Number 2, if you or anyone you know are conducting car sales in a less typical way, please reach out to us. We want to hear your story, and there's a chance you could be featured on an upcoming show. Send me an email so we can connect. My email address is patrick@belesstypical.com.
Behind the scenes.
A story he tells us he's a bit embarrassed by. A story he tells us he's a bit embarrassed by.
We can just take out the sentence.
That was bad?
You said you don't understand it.
Well, was that last one? I was like resetting, and then you just it up again. A story he tells us he's a bit embarrassed by. A story he tells us he's a bit embarrassed by. I don't know. Do any of those sound like it'll make sense?
All of them did.
Okay. Agreed. Moving on. Agreed. Moving on. Agreed. Moving on. I should have just nailed it.
Agreed. Moving on. Agreed. 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 That's what you sound like.
Agreed. Moving on. What's Jonathan's number 3 strategy?
It's a recommendation.
I wanted to say that. Agreed. Moving on. What's Jonathan's number 3 recommendation?